This is the Viltrox 75mm f1.2. It's one of the most unique lenses for the APS-C cameras like the Sony A6000, ZV-E10, and FX30. What makes it so special? Well, because for one thing, no other brand has made an APS-C camera lens beyond the 56mm, making this one of the only telephoto primes you can get today. But is this really all that great? How does this lens actually unlock your potential and even serve you as you create? As someone who does both photo and video, I have adapted the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8 as well as the Sigma 50 to 100mm f1.8 in my kit to cover all the shots that I've needed. Image quality is just too good, and the low light advantage with the f1.8 is excellent for video. My only issue with these guys is that they're a little bit on the bigger side, and the occasional focus hunting with this particular lens, the 50 to 100mm. Normally, if I wanted a telephoto Sony E-mount experience with similar results, I will either use something like a Sigma 56mm f1.4 or use a full-frame telephoto lens like the Tamron 70 to 180mm for the more affordable budget option anyway. But this lens right here has been the best of both worlds, having a good reach of greater than 100mm full frame equivalent and getting a wide aperture of f1.2 as a prime lens. Because of this, I end up keeping my 50 to 100mm packed away instead of carrying all this big weight around. This 75mm lens is on the lighter side at 670 grams with its Hoya special nitrate material from Japan and has 16 glass elements. We got the filter thread size at 77mm, just as a step lower than 82mm if you'd like to use a step-up ring for filters. On the middle part, you'll notice that it does say the word Pro, which means, of course, it's a Pro lens, right? Well, adjacent to that, we have a programmable button here, the satisfying click, as well as an AF/MF switch, focus ring, of course, and a switch on the other side in order to make our aperture ring stepless or stepped. For the way that I shoot, I just leave the aperture on A and control the aperture with my camera's dial. And if you look away from the lens too quickly, you'll miss that there is a little bit of a rubber gasket meant for weather sealing. If you're still new to looking at lenses, just know that not a lot of lenses have this kind of feature set on the lens body when it comes to the E-mount. And when they do, it usually costs thousands of dollars and beyond. Most of the time, you're just gonna have a focus ring to control for less money, of course. So yes, this lens does feel like a pro lens. But now, does it work like one? Let's look a little closer how it works. The 75mm lens is about 112.5mm full frame equivalent. And around this focal length is when you start to get into that macro lens territory where you start to use this more for like product shots, isolating your subject. But this lens is not one for macro work. Yes, macro lenses start to be around like 90mm to 105mm, around that range, at least for full frame. Just note that the minimum focus distance of this lens is 88 centimeters or 34.6 inches, similar to that of normal 85mm lenses. Once you get past the minimum focus distance, then this lens starts sticking well to your subject. As you focus in with this lens, you'll find that you may barely hear the autofocus motors. Sometimes you just won't. If you do at all, it's not an issue for any photo or video shooter. For the few occasions where I do have to use manual focus and use the focus ring, it was a pleasure with the rather consistent focus tracking that I had. Fly-by-wire focus ring mechanisms, like the one that I found on this lens, is not known to have the same consistent focus tracking as DSLR lenses. But whenever I do pull fast or slow, the lens pull isn't exaggerated nor lax. If you're concerned with focus breathing, yes, this does have like an exaggerated focus breathing. It's not really a big deal for me as I'm really not racking focus in and out. But as a video shooter, if that's something that you find yourself using often, then perhaps this lens is not for you. Again, for me, it's not crazy enough to deter me from keeping this lens, especially since I just shooting like talking heads. I don't need some cinematic focus in, focus out. But in the field, what's it like for me to actually use this? Well, it's phenomenal. For a 112 full frame equivalent focal length, this is great for portraits and any telephoto demanding situation. The closest thing that we had in the E-mount system is the 56mm from Sigma, and Viltrox, which is about an 84mm full frame equivalent. But now this guy lets us go the distance. With this kind of reach, we can actually isolate our subjects in photos and videos even more. I was able to achieve this while I was out taking photos during cherry blossom season, despite being surrounded by so many people. I love the compression that I got out of the background, and most of all, I just love that bokeh. In addition, I had no problems with the eye autofocus and face autofocus during any of my photos that I've taken with this lens, nor the video autofocus when I was using this at church. The images coming out of this are sharp from the center and the edges wide open. But of course, the more you close it down, the sharper and more depth of focus you'll have. But when I need it, I'll stop to f1.2 for video when I use this mostly in church or in a dark event hall. Yeah, this lens is fantastic. But for my use case, I personally can't find any negatives. Yet sometimes I forget how far I need to be when using this lens in small spaces. But that's just the nature of using this kind of lens. Others may feel like the autofocus is not quick enough for them in video, but as someone who is coming from the adapted Sigma 50 to 100mm f1.8, this is good enough for what I do. But if you're planning to use this a little more for video and plan to focus rack of some sort, the focus breathing will be evident, but this is an ideal breaker for me for the kind of shots that I get. For this solid telephoto lens, it's gonna cost us $549. Now, for people just getting into photo and video, it's not cheap by all means, or any means. However, when you compare it to other lenses in the market with similar features and value, you'll be spending much more than twice the price. If I want to get something like the Sony 90mm f2.8 macro, you're looking at something like $1,098. That particular lens is a prime lens dedicated to macro, but can also be used for telephoto means as well, especially for portraits. However, it's only as fast as f2.8 and it's a bit longer of a lens if having a smaller form factor is a major priority for you. Perhaps you may consider even something like the Sony 85mm f1.8 on sale for $548 with a little more reach than this guy. But this 75mm gives you more light at f1.2, and when you're using APS-C, more often than not, we need more light. And if you need more reach, you can always use clear image zoom or just punch it in post without having to sacrifice much image quality. But anyway, who's really buying this lens? I say it's for the portrait shooters, the product shooters who don't need macro. It's for the video people who want a telephoto prime lens instead of a beefy 135mm or 70 to 200mm in a church or some reception hall. This is especially if you like to mount lenses like this on a gimbal. That'll be lighter than any telephoto zoom lens with specs like this that you can find. This lens is some kind of wonderful for the Sony APS-C system, and I welcome more lenses like this. So we don't necessarily have to go full frame and spend more if we don't want to. If Sony wants to beat this, they'll have to make a zoom lens at a faster aperture, or any company that wants to make an APS-C zoom lens at f1.8. Until then, I think I might just have to keep these around for a little longer. Who knows?